All right, everybody, welcome back to round 4 here at the Charlie's Collectible Showcase here, 13K here in Atlanta. I'm Loaf, and with me is Jebas. Jebas, how's it going?
It's going really well. I'm looking forward to round 3. Oh, sorry, round 4 now.
Yeah, we are going into round 4. All the player information will be updating soon, but we will be watching the 3-0 match with 4 rounds of Swiss left on the day. Looks like we've got another Ruby Sapphire player stepping up to the mat.
All right, an interesting color matchup here. Ruby Sapphire versus Emerald Steel. Sort of one of the classic matchups in previous sets, but not as much in the current one. So we'll have to see what new cards have made their way into these lists.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen some teched out Ruby Sapphire decks earlier in the tournament, but what changes do you expect the Emerald Steel players to put into their list to maybe combat the current meta?
One of the things that we will likely see is the new Pete. No, not Pete. John Silver, right? No, is it a Pete? The green steel.
There's a 6-drop Pete. That is the shift line I'm throwing on.
Yes, that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, there you go, the Space Pirate. This has been popping up a little bit in some of the green steel lists.
Yeah, similar to Ursula that we saw in the previous match, opposing characters can't sing, and it has a little built-in protection. Pirates gaining resist 1. Being a space pirate does qualify as being a pirate in this game.
I'm hearing that your audio is a little low.
Gotcha. Let me fix that real quick.
That fix for you guys while we
Alright, Jebas, how is this on volume for you?
Still a little quiet. I don't know what changed from before. All right, while he works on that here, our players are getting their alterations taken care of here. Tossing back a few cards that are no good and getting ready to start the match.
Alright. Jebas, am I still coming in quiet for you?
You're still pretty low, yeah. At least compared to how you had it set up before. Alright, Ink and pass.
Yeah, we do see the altars go through and an ink and pass from Potato. Sudden Chill being the ink with the Diablo, letting us see the hand of Potato. Heading into turn 2, we see a lot of uninkables from Potato, so it could be a challenging game of what do we ink this turn?
Yeah, now that the information is known that there are cards to take with an Ursula. That is a line that potentially can be coming up here. Looks like we're just going to go a little bit more aggressive, run out of Smee, and likely just quest for one. Considering shifting, actually, for the Diablo.
Yeah, we do just see a quest and pass with that Smee joining the table, threatening an additional 2 lore, and another pass from Potato. Not ideal at all in this situation.
Yeah, the hand looked pretty ugly. Since there were 2 Be Prepareds, likely those came from the redraw after the initial alteration, so pretty tragic of a draw, I would say. I'm probably going to see this sudden chill come down, make him discard a card, maybe. We're going to get the Diablo out now here, sing the sudden chill. Discard a card to draw. Yeah, Be Prepared, not a big shock.
Yeah, notably with that Be Prepared being sent to the discard pile by choice, this Ursula that we do see is going to be able to take the other one, making the options for board removal lower and relying on that Sisu that we also saw from the Diablo, but Brawl cleaning up the big Diablo for the time being.
Alright, there goes Ursula. For a Calhoun, it's an interesting choice. I suppose, given that it has the additional strength, it is less vulnerable to Brawl. Grammatala. Trying to fix this hand here a little bit. Did find a popsicle.
Yeah, this hand from the Ruby Sapphire player has definitely been much more slow and steady than we're used to seeing. No Hirams, no Sails. Tipo could have smoothed out the hand a little there. But we do pass over to TwigTwag's 5th turn. Let's see what he's got working for him. Cricky into the inkwell, and Cricky to the board.
And likely just to put a little bit more lore pressure. Cricky out of these decks generally is one of the higher individual lore count characters, given that it can quest for 3.
Yeah, and especially with the slow start from Potato, it is going to be much more difficult for him to get that Cricky off the board. But we do see the first bit of ramp this game and a how far I'll go coming out of Grammatala.
A little bit more ink on the field here. And Maui to take out this Calhoun, it looks like. So between the John and the Cricky, could go up to 13 lore. Not exactly ideal. But I believe that there's a removal, perhaps, in TwigTwag's hand here. Probably not the best one for Maui, but...
Yeah, it looks like the draw for turn was that Pete able to stifle any actions coming out of Potato the next turn. But all things considered, the board is pretty stabilized. The reach of TwigTwag is not what he would like at this point, and just flicking that one card around, looking to get some discard. It looks like
a Diablo.
1-drop in his hand.
Yeah, it's a bit unfortunate. So, just sort of forcing the trade with the Maui here. Given that Cricky is a 3/4. Collect the 3 lore. I suppose just move on with our turns here. Flaversham to draw a couple cards.
Yeah, the Ruby Sapphire player playing this game somewhat out of order, but still getting to the same end result. And Tala feeling good enough to just start questing in this position. Way better.
Yeah, given that it's generally going to be a race scenario from the, more aggressive player's side here, it's unlikely that they're going to trade into your Grand Metal anyway, so it's kind of just free to get the extra lore point in. Looks at the hand, takes the other Be Prepared, which we knew was going to happen eventually. And unfortunately for TwigTwag here, the writing is on the wall a little bit because Ink into Sisu is going to just remove this entire board, which puts him in a bit of a dire situation here.
Yeah, finally getting some value off that Prince John and going ahead and questing. Hiram not really threatening a crackback here.
I would say it's pretty likely that the Sisu is going to come down either way. Sort of just depends on if we want to cash in +2 cards off this Sapphire Coil or not.
Yeah, Sapphire Coil not seeming as impactful as it is in the other matchups in this meta, and there it is, the big Sisu clearing the board.
The ability to shrink the 3 strength characters is quite relevant with the Sisus. However, when we only have 1 card in hand, you really need quantity of stuff to be able to actually do much anyway. So it's kind of tricky here. So Diablo to Smee, okay. Now here's where Sapphire Coil can be a little bit worse than Ice Block sometimes, because we have a Sisu in hand, a human Sisu. So we have to ink this Fatalisphere instead of using it to draw 2 cards, so that we can shrink one of the characters to be able to actually take it out with the Sisu. Now, there's a world where you gamble a little bit and you play the sphere first, draw 2 cards, and then try to hit an inkable off of that, so that we still have the Sapphire Coil, but it may not matter at all. Looks like the top of the deck was just all popsicles all the time, so...
Yeah.
And there's a Super Goof.
Yeah, being able to cash in his entire inkwell for cards ended up being a pretty good run out for that turn.
Here comes a Bruno, or perhaps one that we don't talk about.
Yeah, unfortunately Prince John not on the board anymore to take advantage of that discard, but now Emerald Steel on the back foot.
Alright, Even Odd got the Sisu. Alright. That's a start, though Flaversham is able to just draw a new grip here.
Yeah, 2 popsicles in play, plenty of items to cash in. And Super Goof being an excellent threat against this Smee.
Another Goof. And a Pirate's Life.
Just to make matters worse for TwigTwag.
Looks at hand, shows just a Maui. Runs out another one. And I believe that this is pretty well over
Yeah,
It
while
has
not
been a little
technically
rough for a
the
few
end of the
turns,
game,
but
it is the beginning of the end. The writing is on the wall for this game. What are some adjustments you think we could see going into game 2?
It's possible that if we had the Cove protect the Diablo so that they had to overcommit a little bit more into taking it out as opposed to using just the Brawl, that there's some more lines in there that you can gain advantage out of some of your other cards. It was a little bit of a rough draw from both players, I think. And when you have slightly awkward draws on both sides, generally the player that just has the ability to go over the top is going to be favored, especially when you have things like Sisu in the deck that can, be a very easy 2 or 3 for 1. I think that's some of what we saw here a little bit too, that the few resources that were able to sneak through on the Ruby Sapphire player were enough to keep them alive, just long enough for the bigger cards to come down and sort of clean up.
Yeah, Ruby Sapphire historically being the heavy favorite in this matchup. I was curious about the sequence early on in the game where we chose to ink the Ursula for a Calhoun. We could have possibly seen getting an extra card off the John, getting the B prep out of the hand, and really just leaving Potato on a single Sisu to get through that early game.
We have a Cove in hand, full of a little more expensive cards. See what they decide to send back. So not valuing the Cove at all in this matchup, it seems like, from TwigTwag's side. Unless that's our keep pile.
That does look like the keep pile.
Perhaps trying to plan out the first couple of turns here.
And I believe that was a keep 7 for the Emerald Steel player.
Okay, interesting. Not sure Storm is really the best card in this matchup, but... Oh, well, we just inked Cove. Okay.
Possibly not worried about the Cove benefit with all the coils going around.
Alright, takes a peek at the hand, sends it back.
Yeah, Potato seemingly comfortable to run back last game, just playing Ink Pass and seeing what his opponent can do.
Alright, Ink run out of the Smee, and we'll get in for the 1 here.
Getting a strong feeling of deja vu here, opting not to shift the Diablo into play. Getting an extra card there.
Yeah, that is interesting. I assume that they saw removal, probably erring on the side of caution with it so that they don't get totally blown out. So there certainly is a coil. It definitely does make the Cove a lot less impactful in this matchup for sure. Calhoun kind of weird in this matchup. It is one of the better 2-drops in Steel, especially in these sort of mid-rangey style decks. But it is sort of at its worst in this matchup, I would say. Yeah, given it's okay at best against what they're doing.
Yeah, the uninkable count, Calhoun being one of the uninkables, is definitely coming into play here, where it seems like TwigTwag is having some challenges inking and developing his hand the best he could.
Alright, so get in with our
coming down
with our Smee as well. Do we have a song to shift with?
Well, we definitely inked the Hypnotize. I don't know if there was another inkable that we could have taken advantage of. It did look like there was a Storm Rage on in the hand, but I'm not sure if that might have just been a different steel card.
All right, running out of visions here. Unlucky from the Ruby Sapphire player to not hit any ramp on either turn 2 either game so far. Wasn't a problem with such a slow start previously, but this game I think it'll be a little bit more problematic, I think.
Yeah, so there is a Storm in the hand, it looks like. And that Vital Sphere, probably some foreshadowing, looking towards the Hiram on turn 4 for Potato.
Certainly possible.
Yeah, and the super goof that showed game 1, making TwigTwag hesitant to turn that Prince John sideways.
Alright, so we do Flaversham, do eat the Vital Sphere here. Not a big surprise. Pretty typical line here, I would say. And there's a lot of lore pressure on board. 2, 4, 6, 7. If he decides to just send in everything. If we decide to be a little bit cautious on the John again, we'll go up to 12. Trade out the one Smee, cash it in for its 6, and then put 1 damage on the other Smee here.
Yeah, 1 damage on that Smee. I'm sure we will catch that up. Opting to manually play the Diablo here. And there's that damage. $12 lore, nothing to scoff at here, but we did see Pirate's Life in game 1 that could be utilized to catch up. Coil plus Sisu taking out the Diablo.
Alright, another Vital Sphere to draw 2 cards. Certainly not as good as Fortisphere in this case, but that'll do just fine to draw a couple more.
Looks like the hand is 2 more 3-drop Diablos and that Storm that we've had.
Could storm this Sisu here. I don't hate that.
Yeah,
at least
preventing the shift line for the big Sisu.
Yeah. Still seeing it with John.
Yeah, at this point I think we do just have to turn this Prince John sideways and keep it vulnerable to those charge characters we've seen in game 1. Not much we can really do, we just have to hedge what we have on board and see if it's enough.
Alright, we end up questing out here. Puts us up to 15. He's got the 2 damage now. And we'll see what Ruby Sapphire's got to be able to deal with this here. So that did take out the line of the Shift Sisu, so that's no longer a possibility.
Yeah, it did look like there was a Maui in the hand. Hideaway going into the Inkwell, not much use in this matchup.
Okay, I believe opts to shrink the Smee. I would say you run out the Maui here, crack into the John, and you could take out the Smee with the Flaversham. Brawl would be fine on the bird as well. But I definitely think that the
Flaversham...
Flaversham...
just keep his Hiram a little safer for this turn.
Tipo and pass. Okay. So at 15, so pretty close to...
Yeah, Hypnotize in the hand of Emerald Steel. Potentially 2 cards to be netted here. Although we might opt to just develop Calhoun.
Deciding what character run out here. Opts to draw 2 cards.
Looks like you only drew 1 there?
1 off of the spell and then 1 off of the discard. But drew them separately, which is how you're supposed to do it.
Oh, okay.
Trying to figure out what the play is.
Yeah, it does look
here.
like we can shift Diablo in, get a sudden chill off for an additional card and another card on the draw step of Potato.
You end up shifting. And opt to sing, discard a card. Draw something else, and... Alright, so we discard the last card, which is a Sisu here. Okay. I don't entirely hate it, as long as we draw our card with Diablo. Yep. Okay. And then we get rid of the coil to draw the 2 cards, which, honestly, from TwigTwag's perspective, is actually decent in this case.
Yeah, getting 3 cards this turn, definitely giving him some gas in the tank.
And never didn't have Sisu anyway. Now, the unfortunate situation here is that we only have 3 inks still. So we have a lot of cards in hand and can really deploy 1 of them. So it's going to be...
Yeah, without the coil, these 3 strength characters do present a more formidable threat on the board.
We do have 2 2-drops. We could do Ursula, in case there's something there, and then a Smee. It's not terrible. I might have gone for Calhoun and Smee there, because they only had the 1 card in hand. And then it also limits the amount of damage that the Ruby Sapphire player can do questing wise. Like they're more limited realistically then, because they can't necessarily put the TPO into the red zone. And I think that would have maybe helped.
Looks like we opt to sing How Far I'll Go with the Sisu.
It's an interesting choice to do it with the Sisu instead of the Flaversham. I see. Well, so we just How Far I'll Go into How Far I'll Go. I think the idea is that if we find an item that we would rather cast it to draw extra cards. Down comes a shark. Pretty scary. If we... Okay, so we actually can probably win this game here without the opponent being able to stop us.
Pete preventing any sort of actions like Be Prepared or Pirate's Life is going to be really...
If we just ink quest to 18 and then play Calhoun Pete, I think the game is just over. It would require specifically like a coil into ink plus Big Sisu, again, like a shift Big Sisu.
Yeah, and that play would require...
Or another hand Sisu. It's pretty narrow as far as the lines available if you shut it down with Pete and then play a second character to make sure that you have enough quest pressure.
So we do see the quest come out. Will we see the Calhoun?
Okay, so we just passed here. I'm not sure why, but... Oh, we have the shift Pete. It doesn't matter. We do have the steel emerald shift Pete, so it is giving a false sense of safety here, I think. Where if you take out all the cards that are on the field, that you're safe. However, the shift line is worth 2, which is plenty.
Yeah, taking out that Smee with a challenge.
So I do think this line is maybe a little riskier if we knew that our opponent perhaps had the coil already. But it also does mean that if they just pass, then we'll take the game and we'll go to the next one.
And we do see Pete's base
go to 20.
Come down.
That'll do it.
This game with 3 actions in hand for Potato. Well, an interesting couple of games. Potato will get the choice of player draw this match, and maybe we will see something normal this game rather than Ink Pass. You know, we haven't seen a Popsicle on one. We haven't seen the ramp into Hiram. Perhaps it's Ruby Sapphire's turn.
Yeah, I do think that line was a little riskier. The only thing that I can think is if Pete was the only inkable in hand, that it makes sense to try and hold it because the shift line is safer. Because the Medusa could still just take out the Pete. Ideally, if you have like a different inkable in hand and can still deploy the Pete and the Calhoun, I think that's much safer. Because likely your opponent is going to want to kill the Calhoun since they have to challenge your characters, and then that threatens the Calhoun actually trading for the 2 lore. So that I think that's a little bit safer, but I believe that it was perhaps an inkable issue, which was the debate in that particular instance.
Yeah, and that just speaks to the potential threats that the Ruby Sapphire players have access to. Medusa, Pirate's Life, Be Prepared, Sisu, Coil paired with any of those. It really keeps the other players guessing, especially in a closed decklist format.
Yeah, I do think that Pete is quite strong, and one of the reasons that Green Steel actually is in an interesting position now from where it was before. Shifting for 4 versus needing to pay 6 for it does matter quite a bit, and it shuts off songs as well, which certainly is very good against like the Shark decks. In this case, exactly what we have here.
Yeah, it also just adds a little versatility to the Pete card in general. It's there to stop actions, but being able to turn it into a potential late game threat is pretty much invaluable.
All right, Vitalis Field turn 1, and we'll see what we're working with here. Looks like Big Sisu, Shark, Maui, Coil, and we did find a ramp on 2 this time with a sail. So we'll see a real game here. Notably, there was no brawl.
despite not having ramp in the first two games, I think Potato really showed how resilient the Ruby Sapphire deck can be. Coming back from two, let's just call them slow hands. Able to stabilize the board and almost win 2 in a row.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did not see in the initial reveal any ways of dealing with Diablo here. So we'll see if they opt to shift if they have it, or just quest. Looks like it is just the same thing that we've started with all 3 games now, which is Diablo into Smee. And then we'll send it back.
I don't know about you, Jebas, but I'm getting quite the case of deja vu watching TwigTwag play as openers.
Unfortunately, this time, the Ruby player has more ink to work with, which can be a bit scary.
And we do see little Sisu take out little Diablo, the daring visitor there.
It does not appear that they have the Diablo in hand, so that is likely why we didn't see a shift here. The follow-up that they've got is not the best. It's okay. This turn is a little awkward at 3 ink. We can really only play 1 card, which in this case is removing that. I think that makes sense. There's not really going to be a better opportunity to remove that card, and we may as well just get it out of here because we need to, at some point, remove that anyway.
Yeah,
I would see the Goofy.
Sphere in play, not quite as card advantage centric as the Popsicle or Force Sphere brethren, but it does say that any card, any character in Potato's hand can potentially threaten the board. We do end up just seeing that Super Goof, though, coming in, taking out the Smee, and putting Potato on the lore board.
Yes. So Goofy is much scarier than Maui in this case, given that it does a very similar effect, which is that it just takes out the character, but... Ooh, okay. So, deploy 2 threats here. Calhoun makes the Goofy not be able to get into the zone anymore, likely.
Yeah, and we did see that Ursula discard a Be Prepared with the only remaining card, a big Sisu, so 5 ink for the Ruby Sapphire player with no ink.
So Visions is a very awkward card here because we're limited on our ink, so our resources are kind of capped. And Visions being an inkable, like, do we play it just so that we have our 6th ink? We cast it and just grab something and do nothing this turn? And that's exactly what we ended up doing. I wouldn't even surprise me if they just took the Grammatala. Yep, there it is.
It was the Grammatala, yep.
Yeah, Sudden Chill would have been backbreaking in that spot. I mean, any discard, really. I could see just challenging, and you just don't worry about the Goofy. Goofy can't take out either of these characters without using the Vital Sphere, and you don't actually care if they use the Vital Sphere plus Goofy to kill one of these dorks. It just doesn't matter from the Green Steel perspective.
Yeah, and Goofy's second ability, the lore gain, it doesn't appear that Potato is any sort of racing position here.
This is pretty rough from the... I do agree with the play of casting that to catch up to be able to play the Sisu potentially that's in hand. Unfortunately, this Goofy is just going to get eaten by the Calhoun. We're going to gain some extra lore. So we're going to gain 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 this turn. Go to 11. And honestly, if we have the We Don't Talk About Bruno in hand, I would just slam it on this Grammatala and gamble that we brick the Sisu, that we just pull it out of their hand, or a Be Prepared if they've got one. If we have Pete, that would stop the Be Prepared. Since we're only at 6 ink, we don't have to worry about the Sisu as much. If they were closer to being able to just slam Sisu, I think I'm more inclined to just try and spin the dice and hit the 1 and 3 or whatever, 1 and 4 to try and make them not have it.
And TwigTwag decides to go all in here.
Draw a different card.
Shifting the Diablo using the Bruno.
That may be enough. I mean, they do have a Sisu, but there's a lot of lore coming through here. Grammatella likely going to take out the Smee. We're still coming in for another 4, puts us 15. And the Sisu doesn't really clear the board completely.
Yeah, we could use the Vitalosphere here to clean up all the non-Sisu threats, and
That's
then
true.
have it be a Pete on Sisu 1 versus 1.
That's true. Use the Grammatella to take out the Calhoun. I don't hate that. It's not like the most exciting, but given if you think about how Ruby Sapphire wins any game, it is not by being dead. If you're still in the game, the top of your deck is always amazing compared to most decks, right?
Yeah, the top of the deck, especially paired with cards like Vision and Maui Shark, How Far I'll Go, you have so much reach and so many options that as soon as you stabilize, you can really pick the answer you need when you need it. Potato here thinking about how to survive. Tala trading with the Smee to start things off, and the Vitalosphere being used. Now you could take out the Ursula here, which does give TwigTwag an extra lore and a challenge, but does force him, if he wants that lore, to trade with the Tala.
Okay, so we gain the extra 2 there. Quest out.
Two 3-drops in hand.
Likely not going to play them given that the Sisu is a possibility.
Yeah, we see
Some
Pirate
threats to
Slave
deploy
here,
after.
and there is that Sisu we have been holding on to for the entire game.
Do we have the ability to deploy 2 threats this turn? No. John, we can quest up to 16.
Prince John notably having Ward here, causing Potato to keep having the non-targeted answers, the big Sisus, the Be Prepared's, a pretty limited suite in his deck, but not this game. Sisu coming down and Sisu crashing in to clear up the board.
A lot of Sisu's always online for our Sapphire player here. Alright, deploys 2 threats. That is lethal. If there's not an additional answer here.
Yeah, Potato going over his options. 17 is definitely in striking range. Starting off with the How Far I'll Go to dig. There is the Be Prepared. I think Potato's probably thinking whether or not to sing this Be Prepared, letting him use his Inkwell for other things.
So he sings it, which takes out his own characters.
I think he actually quested there to 5.
and just cast it if he didn't have anything else going
just
on.
played the Be Prepared.
Sometimes hard to know, given that he's untapping his ink every round, which you're actually not necessarily supposed to do.
Yeah, maybe... Oh, another big Sisu. A little bit of missequencing there. Could have sniffed that out with the Diablo.
I don't really feel like there's much else that you could do here. I guess, like, you just run out all your characters and just hope that the fourth Diablo, and I believe that's the second Be Prepared, just aren't there.
Ooh, and you never like to see this as the steel
Alright,
player.
redraw. And pass.
Yeah, one of the draws from the last turn was another keynote card for Ruby Sapphire, this Hiram Flowersham. Drawing 2 cards, potentially giving us enough gas to answer whatever may come next. And the fact that TwigTwag had a song and no character there, really setting him behind. And speaking of setting him behind, a Pirate's Life coming out.
Pirate's Life, a bit of a disaster here.
Playing of Visions here. Once again, we do see that Prince John, which the ward ability forces Potato to have something a little extra to remove it, but the lore totals are starting to get closer here, Jebas. We've got 11 to 15. Sisu closing that by 3 every time he quests. And Maui Shark plus Visions closing that gap even further. Well, here's a tied up game. Sudden Chill gonna...
Alright, and then that'll be the game. That makes sense. Once the Pirate's Life comes down, you kind of run out of options.
Yeah, quite the interesting set. I mean, by no means the ideal start for the Ruby Sapphire player in any of these games. The matchup has typically been favored in Ruby Sapphire, and set 7 seems to be holding true. Neither of these decks really getting a ton of new cards. Ruby Sapphire taking advantage of the coils. We saw Emerald Steel rocking the new Pete.
Yeah, the new Pete is certainly interesting in the fact that it allows your already in the deck existing Petes to be better, right?
Yeah. So earlier we saw a Ruby Sapphire deck that was more tech towards the Sapphire mirrors with that Sword of Truth taking out the Tamatoas. What are your takes on the 2 lists that we've seen from Ruby Sapphire so far?
I think that the Shark deck is sort of the classic play more to the board and, you know, rather than leaning as hard into items, it's leveraging things like Maui Shark and more of the spells to actually gain advantage that way. And then it also has the the Pirate's Life, to sort of, once you've controlled the board, you claw back some of that lore so that your opponent doesn't have the ability to just slam the door with a single goat or whatever. You now have full control of everything, right?
Yeah, and I'm glad
Whereas
you brought up...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying, I'm glad you brought up the Maui Shark, because the name of the game for these Sapphire decks seems to be recursion, and while Tamatoa is the recursion for the item decks, Maui Shark is very much the recursion for these action-heavy lists, being able to bring back that Pirate's Life, being able to bring back maybe a Be Prepared that you lost earlier in the game.
Yeah, also the fact that when you get into a situation, because I played a bit of Shark last set, when you get into a situation where you have Shark in play, you have Pirate's Life in the discard already, like the amount of stuff that you need to do from the other side to even get any more lore, you have to have a full 20, or you can't quest anymore, because you make it worse on yourself, because now they can claw it back immediately. And like, that can be really brutal, and that was what we dealt with all last set. But now you have the other Ruby Sapphire lists, the ones that are bigger than this. They're not running the Maui Shark. They're not worrying as much about sort of that mid-range rumble. You know, they're playing the big Tamatoa, and they're playing the smaller Tamatoa, and the big dragons. And, you know, like we saw earlier, they have more tech options. They have the things like Sword of Truth, and they have the ability to get some of these items back if they go away. So it's very interesting in that instance, because those decks, I think, are going to be better positioned probably against the Sapphire Steel than the Shark list, because the Sapphire Steel decks, they sort of just play this combo where they play a bunch of items, and then they just, like, Pete plus Crab, and then they untap and just, like, dime and kill you, right?
Yeah. And I think we'll probably see by the end of this weekend which of these Ruby Sapphire decks has the right techs for the meta that'll get them to the end of the weekend. But with round 4 wrapping up, we are going to go to a break, and we will be back with round 5 shortly.